When I moved to Los Angeles, I was determined to try every transportation option so as to avoid the many headaches I experienced when I was a car owner. And there were many. This past summer, I drove over a nail on the highway at 10 p.m. at night. I sat on the shoulder of the interstate dealing with a flat tire, with cars whizzing past me at 70 miles per hour. I was in my car, I was not outside of it. Transmission, brake pads, starter, battery, and then there was the alternator, which went out while I was on that same interstate where I got a flat tire, en route to a friend's wedding. You name it, I've lost it, or it's broken on me. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I was inclined to try public transportation. And so far, so good. Everyone told me public transportation in Los Angeles was a nightmare and difficult to navigate. Everyone told me Angelenos were rude and you didn't want to be on a bus with them. Well, let me tell you, once you've navigated public transportation in Israel and squeezed in between Israelis, Ben, I see you laughing, you can do anything. You can navigate anywhere. The public transportation isn't perfect. It adds a bit of extra time to my commute. But you know what makes up for that? Getting to know my neighbors, the people around me, the people in my community, the people with whom I share a zip code, news stations, radio waves, and everything else that makes our air feel like a roof. Today, we can very easily lock ourselves in our own personal universes, literally our cars, where we never have to make eye contact with one another as we commute from house to work and back again. And metaphorically, where we pop in headphones while walking down the sidewalk, creating walls that in essence say, I'd rather be listening to my music than talking to you. One of my professors recently told us a story about a comedian who loved the New Jersey Turnpike, of all places. For all of its messiness, its potholes, the fact that it slowed them down, that comedian believed that odd intersection of real estate reinforced the notion that people are inherently good. Why? No matter what, 99.99% of the time, as cars slowed and everyone had to pick a lane, inevitably, one car would let another car in, and another would follow the same pattern, in the off chance that there would be that one person who wouldn't let them in. 99.99% of the cars would make up for that. I'm not a mathematician, but I don't need to be, to see what happens when one act of kindness, one act of compassion occurs. When we make eye contact, when we start conversations, when we listen, when we let people in our lanes, we make it possible for everyone to enter our city's arteries so we can all navigate our interstates and share terrain, thus proving that kindness keeps the blood flowing. Eileen had vibrant red hair, practically orange, and after seeing me run across the street and jaywalk to catch the bus, we started talking, and very quickly we were comparing shuls in Los Angeles and talking about our takes on Judaism. The driver of the 105, which is what I take to get to school every morning, cares about each of her passengers and actually took the time to inquire about my student card and the perks that I should get for getting the student card. She always greets her riders with a smile, and 99.99% of the people who step off her bus shout a thank you as they disembark. She creates connections by simply smiling at people. I'd like to think she cares about my response when she asks, "How are you today?" But the pure fact that she makes eye contact solidifies a connection in the most historical of ways. Before Facebook Messenger, before tagging, before poking, I don't know if anybody remembers poking, people made eye contact. Early man and early woman didn't retreat into their cars and their presets, their headphones and their Facebook news feeds. They listened to one another. At that point in time, it may have been more of a survival mechanism, But think about it. What if today we had to listen in order to live? Today, during services, David Ribb prayed the Unitane Tokef at the opening of our Amidah. There's a beautiful line in that prayer that goes, Uvishofar gadol yitaka, v'chol demamad aka yishama. And so a great shofar will cry, Tekiah, a still small voice will be heard. This prayer proclaims the power of the day, and later goes on to talk about the power we relinquish in the face of God, who is the great judge, and decides who will live and who will die, who will rest and who will wander, who will be humbled and who will be exalted, just to name a few. Amid this prayer, there's one line that sticks and rings in my ear. A still small voice will be heard. To what is this line referring? The shofar is compared to a voice, a great disruptor, a voice that causes the angels to suddenly stop and enter the artery of commute as they and us prepare for judgment. It sounds intimidating, doesn't it? Judgment, and then the talk of angels, and then the talk of God deciding who lives and who dies. There's a lot we find challenging in our prayers, and it's okay to challenge these things. But think about it. A shofar sounds, disrupting the monotony of the flow, the mundanity of our day-to-day drawl, and commands us to hear. In addition to hearing, what about looking up? What about making eye contact? What about exchanging a smile? What about any of these nonverbal communication methods that show that we're not shutting people out? To me, I'm still working on the idea that God decides who will be humbled and who will be exalted. And I wrestle with the idea of angels, but I let all of these ideas in my lane. We share this world with people who hold different beliefs than we do. We wrestle with ideas that don't fit our ways of thinking. But can we still accommodate them without feeling like we have to give up something about ourselves? We don't need to believe everyone. We don't need to agree with everyone. But we can give everyone a space to be heard. A still small voice will be heard. The small voice that disrupts the monotony symbolizes the compassion in our day-to-day lives because it reminds us each of the importance of showing people that we are ready to listen. Historically, the shofar was also sounded as a symbol of the Jubilee year, as I talked about last night, which occurred every 50 years when the land was allowed to rest. Slaves went free and debts were canceled. The Jubilee year was supposed to prevent institutionalized poverty and excessive accumulation of land and other wealth. While we may no longer have the practice of observing the Jubilee year in Southern California, for a moment, imagine what it would feel like if we still allowed the shofar to have this redemptive quality, to disrupt us in a good way, to cause us to look up and say to our neighbors, we may not agree, or you may have owed me money, but I will show you compassion, and I will start by hearing you and listening to what you have to say. Historically, Unitane Tokef was recited as part of the Rosh Hashana Musaf service. Musaf means additional and symbolizes the additional sacrifice once performed on Shabbat. Today, the Musaf service is a repetition of the Amidah, but as Reformed Jews, we typically don't believe in this practice. So instead, we just do one Amidah. During this part of the service, you have Unitane Tokef, a still small voice will be heard prayer. And following that, we do three inserts of the Kedusha that each talk about what makes the world holy during the high holidays. Dr. Rachel Adler describes the first paragraph as a prayer so each of God's creatures will feel the awe and wonder of God's presence in the universe and be drawn together and inspired to action. The second paragraph is a prayer that all may experience the national restoration of Israel to its land. And the third is a prayer that envisions the whole world redeemed, a world no longer ruled by arrogant self-interest, a world based on justice, where joy is truly possible. Each of these prayers begins with the Hebrew, uvechen, which means, and so. As if each prayer isn't a start of something brand new, but something that is always connected to what precedes it. Holiness doesn't stand alone. It stands on multiple things: awe and wonder, restoration, and redemption. Each intrinsically connected to the other, none mutually exclusive, living in isolation with its headphones on. And so, what would make our world a little more holy in 5779? What still small voice will we allow to disrupt us and wake us up to see the faces of our neighbors, to listen to what they have to say, and possibly smile at them? It isn't all about my bad luck with cars that drove me to not buy one when I moved to Los Angeles. Growing up, I was always the first person to get on the bus and always the last person to get off. I lived the furthest from my elementary school, and I always became friends with my bus drivers. Mrs. Gardner took special care with her name sign, displayed prominently next to her rearview window, and surprised, she drew it to look like a garden. Mr. Richards, my afternoon bus driver, loved strawberry milk, and when Rebecca Abrams, Josh Clayton, and I were the only three left on the bus, he would speed down this windy hill close to the end of the route. We always helped him push up the windows at the end of the day, which is pretty difficult, and I still pride myself on this skill. Despite the friendships I developed with these bus drivers, I ached to be a walker, one of the kids who lived so close they could walk to school. I don't really know why, but I think it was because as we rolled out of the school driveway in our big yellow bus, I'd see them walking home with their backpacks slung ever so coolly over one shoulder. Years later, we moved to a really small community, and I was excited to finally be a walker, but we lived at least 1.5 miles from my middle school. I tried walking, but it took a while. I even tried rollerblading. I was excited to feel like I was in Mayberry. For time's sake, I eventually had to succumb to the convenience of the bus, and I probably developed a friendship with the bus driver. Fast forward to 2011. It was after college, and I was living in an apartment that was 1.3 miles from my office in downtown Cincinnati. It would have been really silly for me to drive, so I walked. I even wore ankle weights as a way to get in shape. My roommates thought I was a huge dork, but I really didn't care. Every day during that walk, I met somebody who helped me understand my neighborhood. It was in the process of being gentrified, and to act like my presence there wasn't adding to the issue would be a lie. I knew this, so with discretion, I was determined to make a connection with my neighbors, and if it felt appropriate, talk to them. I had just gotten an iPhone, was proud of my large music library, but resisted the temptation to plug in and tune everyone out. Every morning as I walked down Sycamore Street, I felt that I was listening to my city wake up. I felt that was one way I could get to know it. One way I could get to know the people with whom I lived among. One way to make us feel connected. Because I believe that when we are all connected, the world is a little more holy. Most of us are just trying to be seen, be heard, and be remembered. If we allow ourselves to be disrupted, to look up, and to listen, there will be more recognition of our neighbors and the world around us. Then, perhaps there will be a little more compassion, a little more holiness, a little more hearing, and a little more listening to that still, small voice. And so, Hashana Tova. Please turn to page 267. Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotinu v'Imotenu, Zochreinu b'zichron tov lefanecha, uvkodenu b'fkudat Yeshua v'rachamim.